Something shook Downing Street this morning, and for once it wasn't a Tory backbencher making headlines or a sensational tabloid scandal. No, this time the tremor came from within Sir Keir Starmer's own sphere of influence, a quiet agreement he recently struck with the European Union, once touted as a diplomatic breakthrough, has suddenly erupted into a storm of public outrage and scrutiny. What was meant to be a symbolic reset in post-Brexit relations is now being rebranded by critics as a ticking economic time bomb, a move hailed by officials as an act of international cooperation could soon translate into punishing consequences for British households in the form of soaring electricity bills and renewed economic alignment with Brussels. And what makes the controversy all the more remarkable is that the alarm wasn't raised by some partisan figure or tabloid pundit, but by a leading energy expert with no political axe to grind. Her name is Catherine Porter, a respected energy consultant, and her assessment is blunt. This deal could go down as one of Starmer's most expensive blunders yet. The core of the controversy lies in the UK's decision to link its emissions trading scheme, UK ETS, with the EU's carbon market. While this might sound like a niche bureaucratic maneuver to the average citizen, the consequences are anything but abstract. These carbon markets are mechanisms that place a financial cost on pollution, essentially capping how much carbon dioxide companies can emit and allowing them to buy or sell emission allowances. The idea is to create a financial incentive to reduce emissions. Sound in theory, but harsh in practice under the new agreement. The problem? The EU's carbon prices are far higher than those in the UK. By voluntarily tying ourselves to the EU's framework, Britain is now subjecting its own industries and, by extension, consumers to inflated carbon prices. That translates into higher operating costs for energy producers and inevitably heftier electricity bills for the public. According to Porter, this decision could cost UK energy users upwards of $200 million a year. That's not political speculation, it's a data-backed projection. Previously, Britain had enjoyed a surplus of carbon allowances, a side effect of reduced industrial activity in recent years. That surplus served as a cushion, helping to keep domestic energy prices down. But this new alignment effectively discards that buffer, eroding one of the few advantages the UK had carved out. Since leaving the EU, in Porter's words, there's no tangible benefit for British consumers. Starmer's level playing field with Brussels is, in reality, a forfeiture of a competitive edge. And instead of leveraging Brexit to tailor our carbon pricing to suit national needs and industrial realities, Britain is bending over backwards to comply with EU rules that no longer apply to us. And as usual, it's ordinary families already buckling under the weight of inflation, rising food prices, and mounting tax burdens who will be asked to pick up the tab. But this isn't just about a flawed policy, it's about the broader message it sends. To Brussels, Starmer's move signals that Britain is inching its way back toward regulatory alignment, quietly reversing the hard-fought separation of Brexit. It tells European leaders that Britain is willing, perhaps even eager, to return to the EU fold, rulebook and all. To British industry, the message is even bleaker: higher costs, more red tape, and less room to compete on a global stage. Innovation and investment risk being sacrificed at the altar of political symbolism. The government's official line is that this linkage with the EU carbon market is a strategic step to avoid future tariffs, namely those associated with the EU's new Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. In other words, it's a preemptive surrender to Brussels in hopes of shielding exporters from additional levies, but in doing so, Starmer may have ignited a new wave of domestic discontent, one that questions not just the price of carbon, but the price of quietly walking Britain back into Europe's regulatory shadow. This is essentially a levy, the European Union's plan to tax goods imported from countries with looser carbon regulations, known as the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBOM. It's intended to protect EU industries from being undercut by cheaper, high-emission imports. The UK government's logic is simple. By aligning with the EU's carbon pricing now, British companies will avoid being hit with these taxes when CBM takes effect. But this justification quickly falls apart under scrutiny. A report by Frontier Economics, notably commissioned by the energy industry itself, estimates that this alignment might save the UK around $770 million over 4 years. That sounds like a win until you consider that the same agreement could add more than $200 million annually to electricity bills. Do the math, and those projected savings are almost entirely wiped out by the increased costs to consumers. This isn't a coherent economic strategy. It's political theatre. Starmer's government seems far more concerned with looking cooperative on the international stage than protecting the wallets of British families. They're trading real measurable costs for symbolic diplomatic wins, and it's starting to look like a pattern. While the public is crying out for relief from a cost of living crisis, the government is quietly tying the country into rigid agreements that limit flexibility and stifle sovereign decision-making. The most alarming aspect? We are gradually losing control, not just over our energy prices, but over our fundamental right to shape policy according to our national interests. By syncing with the EU carbon market, the UK effectively signs up to their prices, their structures, and their pace. We lose the ability to respond quickly to economic shifts, to recalibrate based on domestic conditions, and to shape a carbon strategy that encourages local investment and innovation. These decisions are being made behind closed doors, with minimal debate and next to no transparency. What's being sold as cooperation is, in reality, the slow erosion of our post-Brexit independence. The long-term costs of this could far outweigh any short-term diplomatic brownie points. Experts like Andy Mayer of the Institute of Economic Affairs have been candid about the alternatives. Britain could have chosen a completely different route, slashing carbon costs to attract investment, tailoring a market that served both environmental and economic goals, and positioning the UK as a uniquely competitive green economy. Instead, Starmer has steered us straight back into the orbit of Brussels, letting them set the terms. Meanwhile, another story this week further illustrates the disarray in Britain's global image. This time, 30,000 feet in the air, a flight from London to Ibiza descended into chaos as a group of allegedly intoxicated British tourists wreaked havoc mid-flight. Spanish passenger Erica Barricina documented the mayhem in a viral video describing the experience as absolute horror. Her account paints a disturbing picture. Passengers drinking before boarding, continuing to drink on board, and creating an unsafe, hostile environment for fellow travelers, particularly women and families. Baraskina's frustration wasn't just about the incident itself, but the wider issue of party tourism that has plagued destinations like Ibiza for years. She called for stricter rules, starting with banning visibly intoxicated passengers from boarding and stopping the sale of alcohol during flights. Her plea echoes a broader European backlash. Over 130,000 residents in the Canary Islands recently took to the streets protesting the flood of tourist rentals that are pricing locals out of their own homes. In Barcelona, similar unrest is growing. Tourism, once a lifeline for these places, is now seen by many as a threat to culture, to community, to basic livability. And so, from a carbon deal that inflates our utility bills to public incidents that erode our international reputation, one pressing question emerges: who is actually looking out for Britain? Because at the moment, it doesn't feel like anyone in charge is. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more hard-hitting breakdowns like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next update.